Good afternoon. Here, case good morning, 7G. Um, this morning for our class, we'll be watching a recording that will be focusing on a topic that we have already started. You'd have remembered my sharing with you that I would not be with you for class today. So it is important that you watch this video presentation and that you follow the instructions that are given and that you answer all my questions. Now, 7G, please remember, answer all my questions. Do my work. We are going to continue what we started in class, looking at what is history. So I'll be reading from the information that you're currently seeing on your screen. I'll be reading the information from you, the aspects of it that I'll be explaining for you. And after I finish reading the information, you are now you will then be required to answer some questions that I will post in the WhatsApp group. Okay? So let's refresh ourselves. What is history? History is the study of the past, specifically the people, societies, events, and problems of the past, as well as our attempts to understand them. It is a pursuit common to all human societies. So as long as there have been people who have existed on this earth, they have been doing things, and the things that they have done have been recorded as historical so that future generations can learn about who these people are. Some of these people are still in existence. For example, the Egyptians. Some of these people are no longer in existence. For example, a group known as the Tainos. You would have studied about the Tainos when you were in primary school. The Tainos do exist in other parts of South America and one or two Caribbean islands, but they no longer exist in Jamaica. And when they no longer exist, when there's no trace of them that can be found, the word that we would use for that is called extinct. Extinct. So in Jamaica, the Tainos are extinct, but their ancestors can be found in Puerto Rico and also in Dominica. All right. Who are historians? Historians are individuals who specialize in the study of history. They investigate. Watch the words that I'm using very carefully now. They investigate. This word right here. They investigate. See, I highlighted for you right there. Very good. Not only do they investigate, they interpret. So whatever it is that they are studying into, whatever it is that they are investigating, they now have to interpret it. They have to go beyond the surface to see what the information is all about. And when they have finished investigating and interpreting the information, then they write about the events that they investigated and they interpreted. They write about the ideas that they got from the investigation that they did, and right, and they write about people whom they investigated and interpreted from the information that they got from earlier times. So let's read that sentence again. They investigate, interpret, and write about ideas, about events, ideas, and peoples from earlier times. Historians use a variety of sources to piece together the past. So historians don't just take one source of material, but they also use a variety of materials. They have to get a lot of sources, a lot of information. So they go through a lot of this information and they piece them together. In other words, they go through them and they piece them together so that the information makes sense. Okay? Historians use a variety of sources of information and they piece them together. All right? So these are information about the past. And these information include, sit right there now, they include primary documents, highlighted for you, they include primary documents. Now notice that the primary documents, you see a comma, which means that primary documents are one source of information that they use. They also use artifacts. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. And they also use secondary sources. So the three major sources that they use are primary documents, artifacts, and secondary sources. Okay, so let us move along. Very important question. What are primary documents? Now, it is important that we make a distinction. So let me roll this thing up a little bit for you. You notice I asked you what are secondary documents? Good. But notice that there's a distinction between primary documents and secondary. What did it say? Documents are source, secondary sources. So let's focus on here. So it should be there should be two distinctions. Primary documents. So we have it right here. Primary documents and primary source. See that? Let's go again. Primary documents, we need to know the difference between primary documents, and we need to know the difference between primary documents and primary source. So in the study of history, a primary document, also called an original or primary source, don't get mixed up now, don't get confused, is the original document, including eyewitnesses' account or the first record of events created during the time you are studying. It serves as an original source of information about the topic. Did you get that? So a primary document, all right, and some persons without making a distinction refer to it as a primary source. But I want for our class to make the distinction between primary document and primary source. So a primary document, which is also called an original or primary source. Now, primary document is an example of a primary source. Primary documents are all those documents that include, follow me now, pay attention, don't get confused what is in front of you. Diaries, speeches, music or songs, memoirs. You know, I don't have that listed there, but I'm telling you, memoirs, letters. Primary documents are any information that are recorded, whether in verbal form or in written form. That's important. Primary documents are any recorded information about the past that comes to us through letters, through written forms, or through musical forms. All right? Speech or through verbal forms, speech. Those are what we call primary documents. The difference between primary documents and primary sources is that primary sources involve everything else that comes from the period that we are studying, from the original time period that we are studying, and that will also include the documents. So primary sources would be any information that we get, recorded information that we get from any source that exists during the time or during the period of time that we are studying. So let us say, for example, that we are talking about slavery. The primary source would include everything during slavery time that we can gather that would tell us about slavery. Everything, including letters, songs, poems, and all those other things that would make up the primary document. Do you get that? So I don't want you to miss that. The primary document refers to all written recorded forms or verbal recorded forms of information that come directly out of the period that we are studying, out of the slavery period, out of the history period. Primary document, primary sources now would mean every other thing. That would include the document that we just spoke about, along with the buildings, the clothes, the furniture, the murals, the paintings, everything else that comes. So the primary source are the documents, the art forms, the paintings, the buildings, everything. Everything that comes out of the source we refer to as the primary source. Primary source. I hope I'm not confusing you. The primary source is everything that comes out of the period. The primary documents are only those things that come to us in written or verbal forms. And that would be like diaries or speeches or letters or poems or music or stories that are handed down to us. All of those will now become primary documents. All right? Very good. It's important you understand that because when you get the information to use, the questions to ask will be required to make the distinction. So if at this point you don't understand what I'm saying, stop the video and go back about 4 minutes and replay. What are secondary sources? So we now know what primary documents are, and we now know what primary sources are. What are secondary sources? Secondary sources are those things that are created by individuals that who did not experience firsthand what happened during the period of time, or who did not participate in the events that the author is writing about. Let's go again. A secondary source is a source that was created later by someone who did not experience firsthand or participate in the events in which the author or that person is writing about. So secondary sources are often summarized secondary sources often summarize, interpret, analyze, or comment on information found in primary sources. So secondary sources are all those sources that are the information that are gathered from all those primary sources. So like Mr. Good, for example, would go to a plantation and he would see things about slavery, and he would come back and he would write about what he saw. He would analyze information and then write about what he saw. That would be the secondary source. So common examples of secondary sources include books. So Mr. Good would write a book about what he would see on the plantation, or he would write a biography. All right, so biographies are information that are written about individuals who have passed on, or about other individuals. So let us say I want to write about Paul Bogle. I would go and I would find all the information I can about Paul Bogle. I would summarize it. So see the words, keywords, I would summarize it. I would interpret the information. I would analyze the information. And then I would comment or write about the information. And I would put that in a book, all right, or in biographies, or I would write essays, or I do literary criticism, or journals, or magazines. It's not there, but magazines or newspapers, things like those. All those are secondary sources. Finally, why do we study history? We study history because history gives us the opportunity to learn from other persons' past mistakes so that we don't make the same mistakes. Helps us to understand the many reasons why people may behave the way they do. And as a result, it helps us to become impartial, or it helps us to become wiser as decision makers. Okay, my 7G? So if you need to replay the video, please do so. And then the next thing I want you to do now is to answer the questions that I have placed in the WhatsApp group. Have yourselves a wonderful day.